Okay, we're good to go.
Welcome everyone to the Chamblee Downtown Development Authority meeting, special called meeting for Tuesday, April 6th, 2021. Please, if you are not a member of the DA, turn off your video and please mute yourself until called upon. I will call out everyone's name. If you're here, say hello. I'll start with Brian.
Hello.
Leslie.
Hello.
Van.
Hello.
Ronnie.
She's having sound problems.
John.
Hello, everyone.
Andy. All right. So we think Ronnie's with us. That's quorum, so we'll go ahead and move forward. I would like to recommend that we move the new business to the front. We can knock that out pretty quick. I think we need to make an amendment to change the agenda.
Motion to change the agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. So this is our vintage pizza lot property. We have some ongoing conversations with our neighbor that is not vintage pizza. And we need to get an updated survey done. Brian, all wise and knowing, mentioned we should probably reach out to the folks that did our most recent survey and have them dust that off. I'd like to have Seven Oaks help us with that, because I think there's some easements, there's some underground utilities. Just I want to kill several birds with one stone and make sure that we are getting a full and complete survey together to then help us with not just our boundary discussions with our neighbor, but also marketing the property going forward. So the ask here is that we have the authority to move forward and engage, whether it's our previous survey group or new survey group, to have that updated for further discussion.
Motion to authorize the chair to negotiate additional survey work on the vintage pizza property.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 I think that's everyone. Aye. Thank you. Moving to old business, the related group tax abatement application and basically our discussion about it. 2 ago, we had our regular called meeting. The related group to us and presented their project. They'd asked us to convene in sooner time than our regularly scheduled meeting. So we have granted them that. I'd like to use this time for us to discuss what we think the merits of the project are. You know, if this is something we think we should take to the next level, the next step. I'll just go ahead and start by saying, generally speaking, I think this project helps check a lot of boxes from infrastructure standpoint. You know, I think we get an opportunity here with the assemblage of this property to right size this intersection. We get an opportunity to have some say in some additional pedestrian infrastructure when it comes to the rail trail and a rail trail spur. And whatever it is that we decide, if we decide to do something, we have an opportunity to improve on this project, you know, above and beyond what has currently been approved by council. So I'd really like to kind of open the floor, let folks, you know, have an open discussion about this. And if we get to the point where we think we can push this forward, let's do that. If not, let's defer it or not approve it, or whatever it might be. So I will get off my soapbox. And Dan, hopefully I didn't commit any open fell there. So
So far, so good.
perfect. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I see two incredible benefits, which you have, of course, already mentioned. And that is the building of this rail trail extension. I feel like that's going to benefit the neighborhood. That's going to benefit the other side of Peachtree Boulevard as well. That along with the better signalization on Chamblee Tucker Road, excuse me, is going to make pedestrian circulation so much better and really make that four-way, if you want to call it a four-way intersection, another hub within our city. And I think that that really opens up a lot of great opportunities. I think that including the Chamblee part of the rail trail that is owned by Chamblee in the ask for related to build would be a really good idea. I also would like to suggest that we include some public art on the trail, sculpture or whatever on the trail, which would add to the ambiance and enhance Chamblee's growing reputation as a city that cares about aesthetics and art and making an individual statement. So I feel that those are good reasons to grant an abatement. I also would like to be sure that within that abatement that we do not include the property tax or taxes for the city of Chamblee.
Mr. Chairman, it might be a good idea if a member of the related group speak, since they've met with a number of us since the last meeting, because I'm interested to see if they've got any changes to what they're asking for. Is that appropriate to have them speak at this time?
I was thinking we could dialogue amongst ourselves first and then maybe loop them in and ask some questions and have them go into that. But I'm not opposed to what you're asking.
Well, the only reason I say that is, I spent over an hour today studying this whole thing and the numbers that have been sent to me. And, all of that, all my thinking changes depending on what they actually say. So I'd hate to say something and then have to change everything I said after they talk.
Do you have a direct question?
So if others on the board want to speak first, that's fine. I can defer until after they have their say.
I'd say go ahead and direct your question, and we can advance the dialogue.
Are you saying me advance a question? Because
Yes, yeah. Did you have a direct question?
no, that's my point. I can't advance a question until I hear what they have to say, because since they met with us individually since our last meeting, I don't know if they're still asking for the same thing or not. And I don't want to ask a question that is mute.
Okay, yeah, sure. You guys on the line? Is there somebody that wants to step in? And
Ed, would you like to talk? You want me to? This is Bruce McCall.
Hey, Bruce, I'll start it off, and I may actually also ask Daniel to chime in. I know that he and I have had conversations with various board members together, and then Daniel has had some additional conversations that I unfortunately was not able to be a part of. But Van, there may be more that you're asking about than at least two issues that I'm aware of, and one is an issue that that Rob mentioned initially, and then Leslie also mentioned it, and that's the extension of the rail trail, a connection between the segment that would run behind our property over to the section of the trail as it passes by the park, specifically the ball fields, kind of behind the Park View development. And we're certainly willing to bring that to fruition. There is a cost. We don't know what that cost is. In fact, Daniel and I, even this afternoon, stopped by again to look at the condition. And there are some topographic issues that I think would need to be addressed, probably with some additional retaining walls. Unfortunately, when you do that, I think it gets a little bit more costly. But I think what we would ask is respectfully that you allow us time to get our hands around what exactly would be involved with that. It's a little more complicated, I think, than just running, call it 600 feet of trail. So we're certainly open and willing. It is not included in the initial ask, and we haven't increased the ask to incorporate that. And the second thing is a dialogue that I understand took place about some more green building type initiatives, and there probably is a broad range of things that could be done, but with some of those things I would put in the category of relatively easy and maybe even modest in terms of what's done, but the benefit would be significant. I think it was mentioned, some charging stations at benches, for example. So we're certainly willing to entertain those ideas. I think our building already has a number of green features. Obviously, the city's already passed some significant ordinances regarding recycle. We've incorporated into our project LED lighting that would dim in the parking garage. That's energy saving. There's already the requirement for heat footprint reduction or heat island reduction rather for the top of the parking garage. So on top of that, we're certainly willing to consider some of these other elements, and if we could have some time to evaluate that, we would certainly be on board with it. The other thing I think Leslie mentioned that is a little bit new for me, but I can tell you that Related as a company has an appreciation for this is art on the trail. And I don't know if the suggestion is that we would be responsible for art on the trail, but we would certainly want to see that and facilitate it. And perhaps the city has artists that they would like to have work represented on the trail, but that's a little bit new to me, and I apologize if that's been raised before. I know we have a requirement based on the city council's conditions placed on us to have a piece of art, sculptural type art, at the corner of Sexton Woods and Peachtree Boulevard. And so putting something on the backside and my mind starts working overtime, where would be a good place for people to really enjoy it. And it seems like it would be closer to the park, closer to what I would call the intersection of the existing rail trail and this spur or extension of the rail trail, where it could be appreciated by more people rather than fewer if it were buried behind our property or behind Elaine Clark's, for example. I don't know if that adequately answers your question. And Daniel, you're welcome to chime in since you had more direct conversation with Van than I did.
Hey, Van. So I guess any other follow-up question to Ed's comments?
No, I'll let you finish and then I'll ask questions.
Okay. So in our initial applications, I'm right now strictly talking the ask and the numbers. In our original application, what we submitted, like I said, was a abatement percentage that kind of fell in line with what the CAB had. I know that's not necessarily what you guys want, and we are very, very flexible if you guys choose to move forward with how it could be structured. But in that ask, the total tax savings was about 7.64 million. So one of the things that we really need in order to make this project move forward is, we have a financing gap, and we just need to be able to, again, fill that financing gap of roughly 7 to 7.5 million. So hope that gives you a little bit more clarity, but definitely happy to answer any other questions you have.
I think though the point, Daniel, is that anything on top of that, the extension of the trail all the way or the spur all the way to the existing trail, any public art, any additional green initiatives above and beyond what city's code and energy code would require would need to be addressed.
Correct. That is not part of our underwriting. And Van, I may have mentioned to you in our call that I thought it was, that the full rail trail connection was part of our budget, but it was not. So I apologize for that mistake.
Bruce, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
No, I
since you-
think that's, Daniel covered what I was going to say.
Okay.
So, I guess the one thing is that we could structure it as, one thing is, rather than the original proposal was for declining abatement over 10 years, the other possibility would be just a flat number or flat percentage over the full 10 years. But again, the bottom number being the same.
So let me be very clear here, or get clear. You are asking for 7 million because you have a funding gap. And the funding gap is caused by exactly what? The cost of your cost of putting in the rail trail on your property?
The various additional things that we're having to do because of the challenges of this site, of putting things here and doing a project of this type with the challenges of the topography, adding the extra green space, adding the extra things that we're, trying to make this work as a project rather than just a simple building.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, Leslie, to further answer the question, I think there was a list included in our application of a number of these extraordinary costs and public improvements. And that list has since been enhanced by some of the conversations that we're having now. These additional things like extending the trail further, adding some additional green initiative, those things would be on top of it. So
Mhm.
I think we've tried to spell out what we thought were the cost of the extraordinary aspects of the project, in addition to the things that we think are public benefit, public enhancements.
Mhm.
One of the things that I don't think that we've talked about in the meeting that had been talked about previously in some of the other discussions was the acquisition of the Pete Garcia property. And you could probably correct my history on this, but my understanding is when you first looked at this property, you were looking only at the Great Gatsby property, and which would meant that all the access for the apartments would be to and from Sexton Woods Boulevard or Sexton Woods Drive. And upon further reflection and suggestions by some potential interested parties, you looked at acquiring the Pete Garcia property because of the potential access to Peachtree Boulevard and the potential alignment with Chambly Tucker Road. One of my understanding is that because he was not necessarily a motivated seller, in order to acquire his property, you had to pay a significant premium above market value. And that's one of the elements that I recognize where the project has gone over and above at some significant additional costs. Can you go into that a little bit further?
Sure, happy to. We started looking at the Gadsby property at least 2 years ago. And with the passage of time, it seemed like we were able to get to a point where we had an agreement with the owners of that property. But it was only to do, call it 3.5 acres, 3.6 acres of property that is essentially Gadsby. It became clear through some of our early conversations, kind of the floating of the trial balloon, if you will, to see what the city's interest would be in having a development on the Gadsby property, that it was suggested that there were a couple of I won't call them concerns, but things that we were asked to look at. One was a more unified development, not only of the Gadsby property, but also the Garcia and Company property. And I think I mentioned this in the previous meeting, but the Garcia and Company property, which is 1.3 acres, is relatively narrow at the frontage, but it goes deep. It goes as deep, in fact, as the majority of the Gadsby property. Not quite, but pretty close to the same depth. So I would describe it as something of a shotgun property. And if you were to develop it, honoring side yard setbacks and rear yard setbacks and the other aspects of development ordinance, it would yield something that's probably not more substantial in terms of square footage, usable square footage, than what's there today. In fact, the square footage that's there today is not really supported by the parking. And so if you were to park something more significant, I think it would be a challenge to even develop that property. So by unifying the properties, I think you get something that doesn't leave a gap in the teeth, if you will, across the Peachtree Boulevard frontage. The second issue that was mentioned early on was concern over traffic into Sexton Woods, and the ancillary benefit of unifying the property is that we can then have a significant access point onto Peachtree Boulevard. And as part of our early diligence, we met with the regional DOT office, and it was made clear that a new curb cut was probably not going to be something they would allow on Peachtree Boulevard. However, if we could close the Garcia and Company driveway and replace it at the traffic signal, then that would be something that the DOT would be open to doing. So the secondary benefit of combining the two is that we can therefore eliminate Pete Garcia and Company's driveway. There would be no ability on our part to compel Garcia and Company to cooperate and close their driveway. I suppose DOT could condemn their driveway, but they would then need something in the alternative. And so I think this satisfies that second concern by putting the majority, far and away, the majority of our traffic onto Peachtree Boulevard as opposed to on Sexton Woods. And another benefit by doing that is that we clear up what we think, and what I believe is probably the opinion of a number of other folks, even on this call, that we clear up a unsafe condition, that is the Garcia driveway not being aligned on the intersection, and it sits just off of that traffic signal. And if you've ever needed to turn around and go down in there, and of course we've done it to go to meetings with the owners of that building, getting back out onto Peachtree Boulevard is something of a challenge, particularly if you want to turn left and travel north on Peachtree Boulevard. So that's kind of that background and history. And then there are some things that have flowed out of that, if you will, that some additional stepping and retaining walls, because as you go to the south, the grade continues to rise. So there are all the things that are associated with the additional topography. And then we mentioned in our last call that the Garcia and Company's adjacency to the Elaine Clark Center caused us to do some additional investigation from an environmental standpoint. And there are some groundwater issues coming from that direction that will require additional measures on our part. We would first off intend to put the property into the brownfield program, which would have a remediation plan to the extent we encounter unsuitable soils. But then in addition to that, the chemicals that are in the groundwater emit a vapor that needs to be addressed by a substantial vapor barrier that otherwise wouldn't be required if it were just the Gadsby property.
So I take it you guys have had a phase 2 done, and
Yes. We did a limited phase 2 because of what was revealed in the phase 1 for the Garcia property.
sure. And that's traveling, that's traveling from did you say the Elaine Clark site?
Yeah, well, the environmental issues, as you know, are a touchy issue, and whoever causes the problem owns the problem, but that runs with the land. And so I don't want to imply that they have an issue, but as best we can tell through the historic research that was done, that property at one time, I think, was an IBM use, and some of the manufacturing that was going on was producing as a byproduct a chemical called dichloroethane. And so it's really only a guess where it emits from, but it is in the groundwater, and based on its adjacency, which you may know, we were compelled to do some additional investigation to determine what, if anything, might be present on the Garcia property, and that's what came of that.
What's that cleanup going to cost, and what's your O&M plan, and what do you think the brownfield program will do? Are they going to cover that cost?
You can get tax credits, but we typically they don't amount to very much. The primary cost to us, though, is this vapor barrier that I was mentioning, and we're placing it between $400,000 and $500,000 just for the vapor barrier. And it would be any occupied space at grade, both horizontal slab and vertical retaining wall, which once again is a function of the topography. We have probably a higher percentage of vertical retaining wall as we step from south to north along the property. And then as part of that, I'm sorry.
You've got a $400,000 to $500,000 sunk cost on environmental here
that we know of. So if we encounter, you have a voluntary remediation plan that would really address anything that comes up. So if we were to take the slab up, for example, on the Gadsby property, and that property has a long history, there are, outside of the footprint of the building, some very low, call it below reportable limits of some chemicals, but we don't know what's under the slab until we go and we pull it up. And if we were to pull it up and find a hot spot, I'll call it, then we would have to remediate that. We would have to remove that and in all likelihood put it in a certified landfill. And those things come with a cost, but you don't know what you don't know until you pull that slab up.
So I actually have a question. This is probably for our lawyer, Dan McCrae, since we're talking about the environmental stuff. So we had a similar issue with the Whole Foods property, and they had already applied for a brownfield before they came to us. I am by no means understanding all the different levels that you might partake in brownfield stuff, but if I remember right, when we did that deal, we came in on top of and replaced the brownfield with our additional money. Is this particular, if they go into brownfield, is this different than that deal or similar?
There were two issues, and one was us becoming a co-applicant for the brownfield protection, and we need to be. And the other is the basket of costs. Remember, there were two baskets: excess costs and remediation costs. So that's a formula. Some of the things that have been said so far, we have in the past taken a target abatement savings number and used a constant abatement percentage until a number of years have passed where that abatement number has been hit. And those two factors, the excess costs and the remediation costs, are what comprise the basket. In terms of cost, one of the things in the original present package application before that was sent to us before, there was a total for public improvements and site-specific development costs of $6.5 million. And we're hearing that number now is larger, and I wrote down 7 point ... which is $1 million more. Ed, can you tell, is the $500,000 for the vapor barrier part of the add-on $1 million? That included in that?
It is included. It's listed on page 9 of our application. There are several line items, roughly 9 line items that were enumerated in that. And you'll see item 6 is the environmental remediation at $435,000.
All right, so this is where I'm getting confused. So you're listing that as something that you want us to cover, but Dan, you're saying that the brownfield is going to cover that or not going to cover it?
The brownfield does a couple of things. It's an insulation from liability, which is what we're concerned about. And it is a source of property tax credits itself. So there, we would integrate the two so that there would, and this is negotiable. There's not a law that says this. It would be in the MOU. So that you take the total cost. Some would be taken care of by brownfield credits. Some would be taken care of by our abatement. And then there would be other costs. And Ed's right, I see that on, yeah, well, it's the same figure. But I see the.
I just want to be clear, if we are not participating in an abatement with them, they're still going to have that $400,000 to $500,000 covered by the brownfield. So it's really not an expense to them because they're already going to get that covered one way or the other.
I'd have to see a spreadsheet, but I don't think it's going to cover the entire cost.
Yeah, it doesn't cover it dollar for dollar. There just are some tax credits. The real issue, as Dan mentioned, for putting or the real reason for putting yourself in a brownfield program has to do with liability. So once you put yourself in the chain of title, you have liability. But if you apply for and are accepted into, and it remains to be seen if we would be approved by EPD, but let's assume that we are, and you have to prepare a voluntary remediation plan that says, if we encounter these things, here's what we're going to do. And then you have to document that and then close that at the end of the project by reporting back to EPD what you've done, and assuming you've done all the things that the voluntary remediation plan says, then you would be able to pursue some tax credits, but they're very modest tax credits and they would not come close to taking care of the cost. You're doing it really as much as anything else to limit liability. And so if the city were to participate in the bonds for title type program where you take title of the property and lease it back, you would essentially insert yourself in the title. So, and I would expect that it would be to your advantage.
Yeah, I get that because that's the same thing we did with the Whole Foods. So
Exactly. Yes.
I'm with you on that.
Right.
Let's move on to the other list of items because some of them I'm just having a tough time seeing why we need to underwrite those that are stuff that really you would have done regardless of if you had come to us. And so I'm having a tough time with the number that you're asking for. 7.5 or 7 point ... as Leslie said, is a little bit more than I feel comfortable with if we are at all going to participate. Things like the streetscape improvement will, yeah, it's only $360,000, but that's something that's city code. Everyone's got to do that. So I'm not sure that that's unique to your property. I mean, there's a number of those items. I can get the cost for traffic signalization, and I can understand the biggie for the utilities underground. I think we can all see what happened at Parkview and what a beautiful project that was, and the utility lines were left up, and it just makes it look ugly with all those lines in front of it. So I can see some of these costs, but I'm personally having a tough time with $7.5 million.
Well,
Yeah, Ben, let me jump in there. The underground utility costs that you guys have laid out there, it's my understanding that would be the cost to you guys to bury the utilities, which my personal opinion is that would be something that would be required. But what the city would require you to do would be much less than that, somewhere around $1 million. So really the incremental cost that you guys are looking to recoup is about $1 million. Is that correct? on the utilities should you guys bury those?
Well, I think
Rob.
there is a payment in lieu that you can certainly pursue, but the cost is much greater than that payment in lieu.
Yep, that's what I'm getting at. What's that net cost? Because the city's going to require you to do it anyway. So what's the incremental cost over what the city would require?
It's probably about that 1 million to 1.1, probably close to 1.2 incremental cost to actually execute it, as opposed to the payment in lieu.
And I think that's just going to be really important for all of us to understand, just tacking on to what Van said, streetscape improvements, you would have been required to do that. Now, if you're going above and beyond what the city's requiring, that's where we can have these conversations, but just putting that on there, it's not a burden. It's part of the deal, right?
Well,
No, it is a burden, and
Yeah.
maybe it's not my turn to speak, but I think in the end, what we're talking about is whether or not this project will go forward. And certainly you can say, if you were to develop it, you would be required to do these things. But what we're saying is this project won't go forward without an abatement. And I think we've been very clear, even from the outset. And I mentioned in the last meeting that you allowed me to speak at, that it's even a condition of our contract with Garcia to close. So we don't go forward if we can't get an abatement to deal with the extraordinary cost of this project. And Brian already mentioned that there's a significant land cost. You could take 2/3 of this away and put the land cost in its place, the extraordinary cost, and it would be back at this number. So I understand and appreciate the board's desire to strike things that might be otherwise typical, but we've been asked to list things that were a public benefit. And we think a sidewalk across the front of this property, which today has no curb and gutter or sidewalk, it has a for lack of a better description, a ditch, is a public benefit. So we've listed those. Does that mean that someone developing it wouldn't have to do or would have to do this? They certainly would, but we would not be able to go forward unless we got an abatement approximate to what we've said here. And I think there's certainly an economic benefit as well. Maybe that's not the driver in how the DDA looks at these things, but what we've tried to do is provide information that we've been asked for, and we think these are a combination of extraordinary cost and public benefit.
Ed,
Yeah,
this is
go ahead, Brian.
I was going to ask, your contract with the Pete Garcia property, how much was that for, and how much would you consider that to be above market rate based on you needing to acquire that? I know we've talked about it, but it's not listed in the spreadsheet in the packet.
Hey, Brian, it's Daniel. So really the reason we didn't want to just straight up call that out is, this is public, and we just, we're under contract and bound to, some confidentiality.
I'm assuming confidentiality.
Okay.
I wanted to be careful with that, but
I want to go back to, I think it was Ed was talking about the economic benefits. So, it wasn't until this morning that Rob sent me over a spreadsheet showing all the numbers. And as a finance guy, the numbers to me are one of the most important spots. We can go through this list of public improvements, but at the end of the day, I like to see what the numbers say when I make my decision. And there is, you are correct. There's no doubt there's a huge economic benefit. And for those who, I don't know if Rob, you sent this to all the DDA members or not, I hope you did. But to those not on the DDA, I can just tell you from a dollar standpoint, the current properties together are valued at about 4.1 million, and you're talking about redeveloping those two properties into something that's going to be worth over $100 million. Now, what I look at is what's the city getting today, and what's the city going to get tomorrow. And right now, the annual taxes to the city are just over $10,000 a year, very minimal. for two pieces of property that I would venture to say there's very few citizens that have ever actually been in either of those buildings. I know I only stepped in one of those two buildings once in my entire life. So $10,000 to the city for buildings that don't really do anything for the city, when you flip over to what the property would produce, afterwards, you're looking at a significant amount of improvement. Like I said, $100 million valuation generates a total tax bill, and this includes schools, county, and us, of about $1.7 million. I do have some questions, though, about if we did strike a deal, how, because this particular property is in the new CID, and this might be a Dan McCrae question. If we are doing a bonds for title and we do an abatement, is the property still part of the CID, and do the property owners and us have to make payments to the CID?
The
property,
Dan, you want me to take it? You want me to take it?
I'd like Dan McCrae, since he's.
and I'd like to answer. So the property is within the CID, and the CID taxes apply to it. But the CID taxes are, like all the other taxes, in the same bucket with the abatement. They're abated by the percentage of abatement that we allow.
So we can't structure it in a way where we abate a percentage of taxes for everything except the CID. The CID.
Hold on. There's a big caveat here.
Who is speaking?
Big caveat.
Who is speaking?
Rob Smith.
Okay, Rob.
You can't put the multifamily into the CID. They don't pay into that. And additionally, if you don't parcel out the retail from the multifamily, you can't put any of the property into the CID. So the impact of the CID is minimal to begin with. That being said, I would probably like to see them parcel out the retail from the multifamily, if that's something that we want to do.
You're saying parcel those out in some kind of condo format so that they are considered commercial rather than residential.
That is my very limited understanding. Yeah.
Let me offer some clarification. The project remains, of course, within the borders of the CID. The CID taxes don't apply to residential the way that it's defined, and it's interpreted to apply that multifamily is residential and is exempt, and anything that's not residential is not exempt. But to the extent that there is the desire for us to make the CID whole for whatever taxes are subject to CID taxes and are abated, then we can require payments in lieu of taxes to be made at the CID.
Okay. All right, I think that answers that question.
Yeah. I was going to follow up over, this is Bruce McCall on Van's comment before. You were talking about the additional, by a rough calculation is over 13 years, you're getting an additional $13.7 million of tax revenue, even with the abatement. The $7.5 million abatement, 7.5. Over what you're getting right now.
I get that. I understand what you're saying, but we're not at that point yet. We're still trying to figure. We're still trying to figure out what the amount is, because the dollar coming to the city is really going to be dependent on if there's any abatement. I hear what you're saying, that without an abatement, the deal doesn't happen. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure I'm ready to say yes to abatement until I have some more of my questions answered. Gotta get back on my train of thought. We got off with the CID. The base abatement y'all originally asked for with a declining percentage, and y'all also asked for, I think, a certain set number of years. And I told Daniel I have a tough time with doing any deal that way. The last couple of deals we did, were a percentage that used up a bucket of money. And if when the bucket ran out, the abatement was over. I'm not a fan of having a set number of years where if it, I just think it's better if we're going to do a deal together that we are both on the same side. And in a scenario where the economy's doing well and the valuation of your property is going up, then that means the abatement should run out sooner because it's eating up the dollars quicker. And I don't want to be a hard ass. So when the economy's bad and the value's not going up and or the value's going down, then your abatement lasts longer so that you can recover from a 2008 type of scenario. So I don't know if y'all thought about that and if y'all want to discuss that now or wait until later.
Van, this is Bruce McCall. Again, I think I can say, and I did Daniel chime in differently. I think the answer would be yes, we can do it that way. The original ask was done in the blind. We didn't know how you like to structure deals. If you like to structure them in that way, we can do that.
Yeah, exactly what Bruce said, Van. Like you and I talked, if the preference is for a flat payment every year, that to us that doesn't really make a difference. So we'd be very open to that.
Or the flat payment until you hit a target, or however, the idea of having a bucket there, assuming we agree on the amount of the bucket, and the abatement lasting until we hit the bucket, that would be fine.
I'd like to also point out for the people that also, again, didn't see these numbers, I mentioned the $10,000 a year of city taxes that are coming in now. And, I just played with some numbers. If structured right, the city could generate during the abatement period $68,000 to $75,000 a year, and then that would jump up to $150,000 a year in taxes to the city after the abatement was over. So I think that needs to be thought about by all the DDA members of what are we doing? We're trying to create a development or redevelop a property, but we're also trying to put dollars into the city's pocket so they could use those dollars to help the citizens with other endeavors that the citizens want. And that is a significant difference between $10,000 a year in taxes and $150,000 a year in taxes.
Hey, Van, sorry not to cut you off, but just wanted to clarify. So I think it's $250 in taxes for the city after the abatement.
Open up my spreadsheet here. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, then
249,000.
Yeah,
I apologize.
Yeah, it
No worries.
shows.
I had those columns hidden.
No worries.
Yeah, so that even stresses my point even more about the amount of money. I mean, the city can do a lot of good stuff for the citizens with $249,000 a year. One of the things that a lot of citizens ask besides the biggie, which is traffic, and I hate traffic just as much as the next guy, but we do live in Atlanta, and I don't know that one complex is going to change one way or the other, the amount of traffic. But a big concern obviously is the overcrowding schools. We have a high school that is already at capacity, even though they built a brand new one just less than 10 years ago. But I question whether or not you're really going to see that many families. Can you remind me again of the breakdown of the units? Because I think really how many 3-bedroom units, those are the ones that would possibly have students in them.
And then, yeah, the number 3 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, I'm pulling it up right now. But yeah, it's less than 30.
Yeah.
Well, and you had to do that count anyways with the county, didn't you?
I'm sorry, Leslie?
You had to do that count with the county anyways. It was required. And what were the numbers that they said that this, of students that this development would generate?
Well, we haven't done that yet with the county.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and Leslie, I'm not sure I buy those numbers because they said that the Olmsted was going to have all these students. And 2 years ago, I called the management of the Olmsted. I said, how many high school age students do you have in your complex? And they said 0. So
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Van.
Yeah.
It doesn't, the numbers are based on a formula. They're not based on reality. They're
Yeah.
based on a formula. But
And-
you can't make a guarantee that, gee, we
No,
won't have any
no,
high
you're
school
right.
students.
you're right. I just
So-
want to make sure we realize that I don't think it's like this is going to overcrowd our schools.
And if I
but-
may, page 3 of our application has our breakdown. So it's 231 bedroom, 134 2-bedroom, and 18 3-bedroom units.
Got it.
And-
I see that.
And following up on Van's comment before about the city taxes, comparably, right now, that property is generating for the school system approximately $40,000 in tax revenue. With this project, at the end of the abatement, you're going to get 250 for the city. The school is going to get over $900,000 a year.
Yeah, I'm showing 38,000 is what the school is getting right
Yeah,
now.
38. I had 40,500. Yeah, but I mean that's again a 20 times increase that the school will end up with at the end of this.
And all of this assumes a flat value.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well,
So
the spreadsheet that Rob sent me was calculating a 1.9% inflation rate just to have
Yeah.
something in there. But the reality is the way Atlanta's going,
Yes.
you know, the inflation rate is probably going to be much higher than 1.9%.
So,
I wouldn't rep that spreadsheet on anything. That's personal.
Well, I'll tell you
choice.
though, the one good thing about the spreadsheet is it gives me the ability to look and see what I'm doing. And I'll just
Yeah.
flat out say, you know, from what I've heard tonight and spending the hour time and listening to a number of citizens call me and say, you know, their thoughts on whether they wanted it or not. I'm not opposed to moving forward, but I am still hung up on the amount. And I think probably something more realistic in my mind would be around $5 million, not $7.5 million.
Yeah, that's a good caveat, Van. I do want to give other folks the opportunity on the DDA to ask any questions that they have. We're starting to get into some of the nitty-gritty details. So I'd ask that, you know, perhaps we save this for an executive session to go into the detail, assuming that's what the board wants to do. And I will also add to what Van just said in that, you know, I'm interested. I think there's value here, but I do think we need to pay attention to what the incremental cost is on these things and where the DDA's role is in helping the developer get to those incremental costs and bridge that gap. And so I'll just ask that question point blank. You know, if something doesn't happen here, are you guys, you know, walking away from this project, or are you guys focusing on the Gatsby project, or what's plan B on the next steps, assuming this doesn't go the direction you guys need it to?
So Rob, unfortunately, there is no plan B. You know, we would have to really walk away. The approvals that we got were for both sites were for 382 units. So if we wanted to move forward with just the Gatsby site, we'd have to kind of go through a whole another approval process. And given the amount of concern there was about traffic on Sexton Woods, I'm not sure that's a project that we would expect to realistically get approved. So just we would unfortunately have to cut our losses, and that's not something that we want to do. But like we've been saying, it's the deal is not financially feasible, unfortunately.
That's a valid point. So I do want to talk about what those land costs are. I think it's important. I would defer to you guys since it is part of a real estate transaction, if we should save that for an executive session. But I think that's important for the board to have that discussion.
Yeah, so do you speak to that right now? I mean, I'd prefer to kind of have that one-on-one talk with the board if possible, but if you want me to go ahead and speak to that now, I mean, I understand.
Well, I guess, do you feel comfortable talking about it in an open forum publicly, or do you think we need to reserve that for an executive session where we can go into those details?
I mean, I'm happy to.
Daniel, can you do that?
I think what you're being asked is about the land value, Daniel, and we have a
That's right.
a
I don't think you can,
confidentiality.
from what I've heard, I don't think you can, I haven't seen the contract, but I don't think you can do that in a
Yeah.
public forum.
We have confidentiality.
Okay. Are there any other board members that have questions or want to?
Well, Rob, I think one thing that I can share that could potentially help, I hope could help is, in apartments, we're looking at things on a per door basis, right? So what we're paying on the Garcia site, we're only able to add about 75 units. So on a per unit basis, that's over 2 times what we're paying per unit on just the Gatsby, if we were just to do the 307 units on the Gatsby site. So while I know that may sound a little confusing, hopefully that gives you something.
I think, Daniel, I think you need
Sure.
to stop there, so.
I've got a question. This is Brian Ray. I've got a question for Dan McRae about potential structuring the deal in a way to accommodate costs that we don't know what the costs are. And let me get into that a little bit more. And that specifically has to do with the trail extension from the applicant's property to the existing trail at I guess the ball fields is really where it falls to. When we've talked about briefly with the applicant about the interest in doing that, and I think they are interested. The problem is nobody knows what that's going to cost. So my question for Dan is, can we structure the deal with sort of a floating number, that varies, will cover up to X amount of cost, or how do we have some flexibility to cover a cost that is not yet known?
If we are doing this as a use structure, as our deals have been done in the past, it's a matter of contract. There are some things that have to be known when the bonds are validated. So we have to know the bond amount, which is the project cost. However, we can create a formula that provides for the developer to account to us for costs in specific categories as those costs are incurred. And that would include, for example, with Whole Foods, we require an engineer certification of the cost. So there would be verification and we have audit rights. So we know as what we would call qualified costs are incurred. And then and we would also be able to calculate what the normal taxes would be. So we could allow basically net qualified costs against normal taxes. And to the extent that there is an excess of costs over taxes, there could be a carry forward. To the extent there's a shortfall, there could be a pilot payment made. We would have to have an outside date for all this to end because there would have to be a lease with an expiration date. All of that can be done.
Okay, thank you.
But it's my understanding that if we do want them to finish the Chambly's portion of the rail trail, that's going to raise the value of, that's going to raise the dollar amount they're asking for.
And
I think that's correct.
About that, I look back at the page that Ed cited, that has the $6.5 million number, and the environmental costs, at least $450,000 of it is included in that. So, I mean, you all may have more data than I have, but I still don't know what the difference is between what's in the application and the 7.4 million number.
So Dan, I can speak to that because it was more about not wanting to share the really the land premium. Again, just talking when we're talking about the contract. So that, again, we didn't specifically state that on as a line item, if you will. But what we could do is, and I'm just thinking out loud, and I don't know if I'd be able to do this, but could probably circulate something that's more accurate that shows the delta and land. But again, I'd have to talk to our attorneys and make sure that that's something that I can do.
That's understandable, but please also understand that the board's got to have enough information to make a decision on. We can't agree to something that we don't understand.
Yeah. So, yeah, we understand. But again, with the 7.4 number, we're trying to go from opposite ends of the trick. Is one, what do we need to make the project a reality? And two, with this list showing the types of expenses we're having to incur, because to put the project at this site in the way that the city and everyone would like it to see it done.
Well, again, I would point out for the benefit of my board members, I heard earlier that in that bucket are some costs that reflect something that the cities require. I mean, if it's code compliance or something that's required in order to get a variance, I don't know that that's in the bucket for incentives, but that's for the board.
Well, it's incentives for this site. So we could, because they would build it somewhere else. So that's again, that's up to the board to decide. So.
You know, normally in our discussions, board members, at this point, if we feel like there's enough here to merit the next step would be to authorize the chair and council and negotiate an MOU and take it back to the board for approval. If you feel like you have enough information to make that decision.
Yeah, look, speaking from my own personal point of view, I think there's value in this assemblage. You know, I'm having a hard time with these numbers and figuring out what that value is. But I would like to see us continue to move this forward, my own personal opinion.
I would like to see us continue to move it forward as well.
I guess my issue is I'm trying to figure out how do we arrive at what a reasonable number is. I'm not sure that the 7 point ... or is the number I'm comfortable with, or if it's something less. And Dan, is it acceptable to go into executive session to talk more about the details of the property costs and some of that, or do we need to keep that in an open session?
I answer that question this way. You can go into executive session to talk about a purchase and sale agreement, but not about an MOU. So if it has to do with real estate that we're acquiring and the cost of that real estate, the use of that real estate, which would be covered in our lease, that sort of thing, that's okay. To a large extent, talking about a particular abatement schedule is not appropriate for executive session. Sometimes it is if it bears on purchase price and things like that. And we have another situation where that might come up involving some remediation costs, not this project. But it's because of the delicacy of issues like that we usually don't do it as a board. We usually have an individual to chair, get into those details, and then report accordingly to the board members.
Rob, I'm not comfortable having any of those conversations in executive session. I think if we're going to make a decision, we need to discuss it openly and make a decision. But I thought at the beginning, maybe it was Laura, you said that there were questions from the community. Is now a good time to get those questions?
We have comments from the community. You have community comment as part of the agenda, public comment. And so if we are ready to do that and we're done with this conversation, then we can move to that portion if you would like.
I don't think we're quite ready to move to that portion. It sounds like, Dan, can we authorize the chair to discuss the details of an abatement with the applicant without specifying a number?
Yes.
I would be on board with that.
I'm not sure I would.
Well, I think the understanding is that the chair, and correct me if this is not the way it should happen, Dan, the chair would discuss with the applicant the details of that, and then the chair would discuss with the board individually what that number was looking like to get our feedback.
Yes, that's okay.
Okay. I would move to authorize the chair to discuss with the applicant an abatement and an abatement schedule, both of which to be determined by the chair.
Second,
All in favor? I'll go down the list. Do we have Andy? Brian?
Aye.
Leslie?
aye.
Van?
No.
Ronnie? John?
Aye.
But aye. Okay. Public comment.
Yes, at this time, I would like to ask your guidance on how to proceed. We did receive 4 submissions for public comment. I'm estimating that would take me about 8 minutes to read them, but I'm happy to do that. Or we can read up until a certain number of minutes, and then I can submit the rest of them to you for review later. It's how would you like to proceed with that?
What do we do in a council meeting? Is it 2 minutes per person?
3.
Yes, 3.
3?
And by consent, we can authorize more time. Isn't there one public comment that's quite long and then the rest of them are not very long?
We had 1 that was substantial and 2 mediums and a small. Put it like that in terms of Happy Meals. But yes.
And are we allowing folks to speak as well, or just the written comments?
We are not. We required them to put in public comment prior to today's meeting at 5 o'clock today.
I'm happy to stay here as long as we want, but by no means, and is that what I'm asking?
I think they need to be read.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm happy to
Do we
do
have a motion?
so.
Do we
Motion
need
to
expand
read
upon it?
the motion to read the public comments.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
aye.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. Bear with me as I read through these. Thank you. Our first comment came from Sherry Jackson. Chamblee Manor should not receive any tax abatement. The property is prime for development, and Chamblee property taxpayers should not be subsidizing its development and ultimately its profits. The area is already overdeveloped, and it is beyond the pale that this developer is begging for a tax abatement when the residents of the subdivision it is adjacent to strongly oppose the development, which will exponentially increase traffic and noise in the neighborhood. If anything, the additional tax it generates without the abatement should be applied as a credit to the property tax assessments of residents of the adjacent subdivision to compensate us for the exponential increase in traffic and noise, deny the tax abatement, and make the developer pay its fair share of taxes. The second comment comes from Ford Donahue. Thank you for your time and effort serving on the Downtown Development Authority. I'm a resident of a property that is immediately adjacent to the proposed Manor Chambly. I ask that you deny the related group of property tax abatement in conjunction with the development of Manor Chambly as currently requested. We are fortunate to live in a city that is thriving. Driving down Peachtree Boulevard and through downtown Chambly, you can see the incredible growth that has taken place here in the last several years. We should be confident that developers from across the country will recognize this and want to be part of our community without having to provide incentives that are ultimately going to have to be funded by the tax-paying residents of the city. With this growth, there have been several large apartment complexes developed in the Peachtree Boulevard corridor in the last few years. I find it hard to believe that there is a significant lack of multifamily housing in this area to the point where it is necessary to entice developers to build more multifamily housing with tax breaks. The developer argues in their submission that a tax break is necessary for them to move forward with this development. It does not make sense to me that an experienced multinational developer would design and submit plans to the city council for approval for a development that does not make economic sense for them. If that is true, then the burden is on them to reduce their input costs, increase their revenues, or not move forward with the development. The burden should not be on the taxpayers of Chambly to make their numbers work. They list items such as massing and setback costs, extraordinary site work, additional conditions, and mixed use additional cost as rationale for this abatement. I'm not exactly sure what all of these terms mean, but I'm confident that these items should have been factors that were considered by the developer when determining an offering price to purchase these properties. They should not be subsidized by Chambly taxpayers. Opinions on the rail trail may differ, but I do not believe that any community members stood up in various public hearings on this project to state that this segment of rail trail addition was important to them. There will be a significant amount of wide sidewalk both in front of the development on Peachtree Boulevard and behind it on Keswick Drive, so that no members of the community Chambly are going to lack to the rail trail if this segment does not get built by the related group. Additionally, the developer sought and received a variance to place this rail trail within what is supposed to be a 40-foot buffer between my neighborhood and the development. And as a result, they are not foregoing any revenue or unit count to have this trail on their property. If it were not there, it would be a planted buffer zone. Given these facts, I do not believe that rail trail construction is an appropriate reason for a tax abatement for this development. We are all residents of the city. We have paid our taxes to help build the city into the great place that it is today. At the end of the day, we should all want commercial developers that are coming into this community to show that they are fully invested in its success alongside us. All I ask is that the related group truly wants to be part of this community, that they pay their taxes just like everyone else. Thank you for hearing my concerns. The third comes from Brad Kleinman. I kindly ask that you please vote no to approving the tax abatement request for related developments project of Chambly Manor, located at the corner of Peachtree and Sexton Woods Drive. As you may be aware, local residents have been very involved in this project. Although many residents are excited for this area to be redeveloped, there were some issues with the plans as originally submitted. One particular issue was the density of the project. This apartment complex is massive, make no mistake. The city council chose to approve the request for 382 residential units because they felt that it was the only way it would get green lighted for this project. The purchase of this commercial land will be setting records for Chambly. And now, after all the pushback and all the time and effort the city residents put into making their concerns heard, the developer throws this in the city's face. The Chambly does not need to be giving tax abatements to the developers. There are a million other developers waiting for an opportunity to comply with the city and that will pay their taxes. It is important not to set a precedent for an abatement given the pipeline of residential complexes that are in the queue for the city. The public improvements that the developer is claiming is laughable. It includes sidewalks, putting in a small section of the rail trail behind the building, removing a curb cut to align an intersection, and new jobs. I'm fairly certain any other developer would making these improvements as well. This developer has done nothing that warrants a tax break. A public improvement would really be cut to the density of this project in half more than anything. I ask you again to please deny the tax payment to this developer. Lastly, the Sexton Woods Neighborhood Association also submitted a statement. The Sexton Wood Neighborhood Association and its residents have been very actively involved in voicing concerns with certain elements of this development. This included a neighborhood-wide petition with numerous issues, including its density, respecting the buffer, traffic, safety, privacy, and noise. Most of these were not addressed after numerous discussions. From the outset, it was made clear how important it was that the development respect the buffer between itself and our neighborhood, and that they remain transparent and open with regards to communications with the community. At the end of the day, they did neither of these things. Specifically with regards to the request for the abatement, there is nothing in particular that would appear to be providing for the public good to warrant Chamblee taxpayers helping to fund this development. As such, based on the current proposal, we cannot support any abatements. That's the end of comments.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who submitted comments. Do we have a reason to move to an executive session? I don't think so.
I don't
Do we have
believe
a
so,
motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.